It was my honor and pleasure to get to sit down for a water chat with Dolf Zantiga, the founder and creator of the analemma-water-wand, to discuss some of the more esoteric and interesting aspects of water science. So I'm excited to share this interview with you today. I think you'll really enjoy it. Please comment below to share any of your aha moments or insights or questions or anything that surprised you that we talked about. And before we launch into the content, I want to offer you a special coupon on the analemma-water-wand that we'll discuss a little bit towards the end of the conversation. You can find it at waterislife.shop and use the coupon code waterislife for a discount. Dolph Zantiga is a pioneer IT entrepreneur with a background in fiber optics, telecommunications, data mining, enterprise solutions, and artificial intelligence. He is widely published in the field of technical innovation and the influence of technology on society, and is an advisor to organizations and governments on issues relating to innovation, clean technology, and renewable energy. Dolph's career took a fascinating turn when he started to pursue the study of Chinese medicine and acupuncture, and he began seriously exploring the biological impacts of electromagnetic frequencies. For the past 2 decades, his focus has been on researching electromagnetic fields and their influence on biophotonics, water, light, and system physiology. Dolph has documented important insights about the supercomputing power and energy of water and developed new innovations that will be game-changing for the advancement of the water industry. So without further ado, here's Dolf Zantiga. My first question is inspired by Theodor Schwenk, who said something to the effect of really the purpose of water in nature is to weave us into the web of nature, is to weave us into these greater cosmic forces, because water is always being imbued with subtle energies from the cosmos and electromagnetic frequencies of nature. And part of what happens when living beings drink that natural water is that we then become, again, woven into the tapestry of what's happening in the cosmos at large. And when we're not drinking water that has been exposed to those natural elements, we're disconnected from cosmic purpose and universal purpose. So I'm wondering if you can shed a little bit more light on that and how you've seen that work, or how you've seen that idea show up in your work.
Well, that's a very good question. I think that he's right. Water is really playing a very big role in nature itself. As a matter of fact, all the elements, of course, we are very dependent upon each element. Although water is one of those elements that makes it possible that all the other elements can communicate with each other. And water indeed is not only just H2O, but when you see water, when it is coming from a mountain that is in close contact with all the minerals in the mountains, it swirls around from left to right. It gives us energy. It absorbs the sun. It reacts to the moon. So water is the big communicator. And in that respect, yes, we need the right water to be in tune with nature.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see water reacting with various subtle electromagnetic influences and stimuli in your work?
Well, that is maybe one of the most profound things within water. Water is extremely sensitive, really extremely sensitive. And to give you one example, in the multiple tests that we have done in many, many laboratories all over the world, we have given different types of water to, for instance, seeds and plants. And then you see immediately that certain plants respond, for instance, to the subtle energy of the moon in a certain way, if the water has a certain quality. And those are very subtle energies, but they play a major role in our life. It is something we ignore completely. But the subtle energies, they are the ones that keep us alive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think there are far more of them than we realize. I mean, we're basically bathing in a vibrational soup every moment that we're alive.
Absolutely. And it is really a pity that in our whole education system, solar energies and energies as a whole don't play any role at all.
It's true. But I
And
think that's a very recent phenomenon because it seems like ancient indigenous cultures were really aware of this. Like I had the opportunity to study with some water priests out in Bali, and I mean, they have probably the most advanced and beautifully intact water religions in the entire world. It's called a Gamatirtha, and one of the rituals that they do is to collect water from all of the springs throughout Bali, and there are thousands of springs in Bali. I mean, it's so water rich and water abundant. And they collect them in these bamboo barrels, but they're not allowed to put a top on the barrel, and they carry the barrels from spring to spring all over the country, and they're not even allowed to cross underneath any bridges. So they have to specifically drive on routes where the water is constantly exposed to the sky. There can be nothing that comes in between the sky and the water because they're so aware that every single movement of the sun and the moon and the stars directly imprints vibrational frequencies onto the water.
yep, it is a completely new phenomenon for a lot of people who are born and raised in the scientific world. But yes, you're right. Many old cultures do understand extremely well what water can do. And in that respect, I really understand what they do in Bali. And yes, it's true. The environment, the sun and the moon, they really play a major role in that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a constant play.
So, what effect do you think that it's having on people nowadays who drink water that has been in pressurized pipes, it's been stored in tanks, it's been, divorced from nature in every conceivable way, not just from the sky and those electromagnetic influences, but like you were saying, from the minerals of a spring or a stream? It's just completely devoid of any of the electromagnetic nourishment that water would naturally have.
What we have seen in many tests is that water is responding even to certain pipes. We found, for instance, that if you have a straight pipe, then the water is the same from the beginning to the end. But when you have a certain curve in it, you change the water, especially when you put it under pressure. And if there is a curve of 90 degrees, then it has more effect than a curve of 120 degrees. And then you say, what does it mean, that 90 degrees? But it really has a serious effect upon certain things. So it can really disturb the effect. Hang on.
So, if I'm not mistaken, your background was in artificial intelligence, right? You were one of the first creators of artificial intelligence.
That's true.
Very interesting. It's really interesting to me, especially because it seems like you found your way into from one end of the extreme of intelligence to the other. It seems like water herself is the original intelligence. Water is natural intelligence, and it's been said that water is the glove on the hand of consciousness, and that really it's the intelligent communion between water and the ether that allows water to conduct the symphony of life in everything. So I'm curious if you can speak more about the intelligence of water, the sentience of water, the adaptability and responsiveness of water.
I will. Let me first give you a little bit of explanation upon artificial intelligence and what it means, what it does. And artificial intelligence is based upon the fact that you have a certain amount of data, you give it an order, but at the end of the day, you will let the computer do the thinking. The computer itself is creating its own program and finds patterns that you normally as a human being don't find. But that is limited to the data that is existing. But we do found in water that it is much better than the smartest computer in the world, because water has a much broader effect in the information system that it carries. it really carries the complete environment from the outside world as well. And then we talk about, for instance, about the cycles of the sun and the moon, and with its own energy layers. And that is something we hardly can imagine what it means and what it means for us, for all living beings. And there's a certain rhythm in it, and there is an intelligence in it, and within a flash of a second, it absorbs those very subtle electromagnetic energies. It absorbs it. And the beauty of it, it is like a computer. It can carry this information and it can do its work. And we haven't got a clue what work it does, but it does, it works. So there is a much, much broader intelligence in water than we could ever imagine.
How do you think that this knowledge was lost? Do you think it's been suppressed over the years? I know Victor Schauberger has a quote somewhere in one of his works where he says that, over the centuries that water wisdom carriers have been censored and persecuted, and that you can see, in really old books that later editions of the books, any insights about water have been censored and removed from later editions. So I'm wondering if you've noticed that in your work, in your career, or looking back over the history of water wisdom. How do you think that this information got lost? Because our ancestors clearly knew there was something magical. They certainly didn't maybe have the scientific language for it that we have today, but they certainly understood it.
Well, we haven't lost only the knowledge about water, we have also the knowledge about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that was probably the beginning. We have lost a certain sensitivity. And that a lot of people, especially the certain tribes in the world, have still that sensitivity, and they know exactly what it does and how it responds to the outside world. We in the West have moved completely to a more material world, whereby the chemical world is the basis of everything. So we have the famous elements into the world of science, and we have the atomic structure, and it is all fixed. So we have a certain protocol, a certain paradigm, and that is the base of our Western industry. And we have forgotten that the beginning, it has everything to do with energy. And that is something that is step by step coming back now, because that is just it's hard evidence, but we never had the ability to measure it. Nowadays, with the more sensitive methods that we have the ability to bring back that knowledge. And suddenly we start to understand that many of that old knowledge is still available, although now we have to collect it in another way, in a more scientific way. But it proves that they were very right. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we can bring it back within the coming years. As a matter of fact, I think it's very critical that we bring it back in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think our survival depends on it, especially on truly understanding water. There's one ancient indigenous, well, it's not entirely ancient. The Kogi people are still alive and well, but there's one indigenous insight that I really love, that I always kind of return to again and again when I encounter some mystery about water that baffles me, which happens almost on a daily basis. And they say that water holds the hologram of reality. That water basically is the mirror, is the body of all states of reality, from our waking life and the 3D world that we see before us. Water is a hologram of that. To our dreaming world, water holds the hologram of that. To the visions that we receive in medicine journeys or spiritual experiences, that water basically is like a blueprint for all of reality. And in some ways that really makes a lot of sense, because they say that every cluster of water molecules has 440,000 panels on it, and each one of those panels is responsible for sensing and storing and amplifying and transducing and transmitting information, vibration, and frequency. But 440,000 is only the smallest units that we've been able to measure. If we had more powerful equipment, we would be able to measure, I think, ad infinitum, and see that every cluster of water molecules probably has an infinite fractal number of panels on it. So it's really able to kind of hold that holographic capacity. I'm wondering if you've encountered that, or what you've seen in relation to that in your own relationship with water, not just in the laboratory, but your personal relationship and communion with water.
Well, my personal relationship started to build up step by step due to the test that we did. As a matter of fact, I can give you one example of something that really blew away my mind. We had a petri dish with full of seeds, and we could make photos of it in biophotons. And biophotons, they measure the light. Normally you can't see that light, but it's extremely sensitive light. The sensitivity is the same as looking to a candle light on 20 miles difference. So that is how sensitive you have to be. And then we gave it water, and suddenly I saw an explosion of light. But the real thing started when I saw that that light was communicating with each other. And so we took out certain seeds, and then we saw again certain patterns coming back. And we said, what is this? And it was as if there was an intelligence taking place. And that was really amazing. And from that moment off, I knew we haven't got a clue what it means. We don't know anything. We are so far away from reality. And then we did multiple tests. And then we did tests with seeds under the soil. And then we saw that also in the soil, there was a whole rhythm going on. As if a certain sound and a certain light wave was coming through the soil. And then you think, this is amazing. This is really amazing. And then step by step, you continue with those tests. If you're not open for that, if you are in a hardcore science, then you think this is not possible. Then you always want to bring it back to the existing protocols. But if you really have an open mind, you move into a completely different world with completely different rules. So for us, it was a step-by-step approach. And every time it was new. And every time it was a new invention. So it was a real adventure. But it was also a hard lesson because we had to get rid of the existing hardcore science. We really had to be open for a complete new communication form. And that is the work we've done over the last 14 years.
Well, I think that's true science in and of itself, right? Is approaching the world with that curiosity and wanting to discover, whereas, modern science has become more like this scientific religion where you approach the world with a certain set of preconceived notions and then try to make everything fit into that, and that's not real science in the end.
Absolutely true. But let's face reality, water is really strange. Yeah. Take, for instance, a snowflake. There is almost not one piece of snow the same in the world. How is that possible?
Because she's an infinite holographic fractal of
that's it.
Eternal possibility.
Isn't that amazing? Each
so
one,
amazing.
Millions are different. And that is in itself already. And nobody can explain ice. Why is ice floating on water? It should be the other way around.
Everything about water is mysterious and enigmatic. It's like she breaks all of the rules of physics just by her mere existence. She's impossible. According to our understanding of physics, water is impossible. She's a miracle that we get to drink.
Absolutely. It's like a beautiful lady. You never know her.
It's funny, the Kogi say that too. They say if we want to restore our relationship with water, we have to treat her like a beautiful woman. So I'm really curious to hear more about your work with biophotons and what you've seen in the lab around that, because I remember reading somewhere that for every single water molecule, for every 1 part matter, which is the hydrogen and the oxygen, there are 1 trillion parts photons. Per molecule, 1 part matter, 1 trillion parts photons. But then it seems that some water either has more access to those photons, or it just has more photons in general, and maybe some water just doesn't have that much light radiation, or it's not able to access it. Or what do you think around that?
Okay, well, now I'm going to play the hardcore scientist. You cannot measure with biophotons water. You can't. So if people say that it has more than 1 million biophotons in water, I don't know how they've measured it. You can
I think
only
it was a
measure.
mathematical
That might be.
estimate, but yeah.
That might be. But what you can do is see the effect of water on other biological systems. And then you can see really measure the effect of different types of water. So for instance, you can measure it in a plant. You can measure it even in a mineral. You can measure it in a seed. You can measure it in soil. And you can measure it in human beings and in animals. And then you can see the effect. And then you see something more profound, because then you see that it is not only a water, but it communicates with the whole system. You see how water is a kind of communicator that brings it all together. It is as if it is the big computer behind everything.
I love that. The big computer behind everything. So one of the things that has always really fascinated me about water, that it seems like Schauberger sort of points to in some of his work, but doesn't go deep into it, is its levitational properties. I'm curious if you've explored sort of the levitational properties of vortexes, or what role hydrogen plays in that, because it seems like hydrogen is the basis of our entire universe, right? 70% of the whole universe is hydrogen, and in Latin that literally means water creator, hydrogen. So we're like living in this universe that is the creative life force potential of water, and somehow this hydrogen has levitative properties that in the Western world we only grasp gravity, and no one ever talks about levity or what's possible with levity. And yet, how else does water rise in sap to the tallest of trees, or how does it rise from an aquifer all the way to the top of a mountain? And I feel like if there's a way to play with that in the laboratory, it could unlock so much potential. So have you noticed more levity in the water that you guys create, or the water that you guys work with?
Well, yeah, I understand the question very well, because Schauberger was able to use the technology, and he saw that certain trees that were there, he wanted to change the water in such a way that it was able to lift up a tree. And for instance, Gerald Pollack in the US have written a book, The Fourth Phase of Water, whereby he could explain that there are certain plus and minus effects into water, into the atomic structure, and that you can more or less also make it as a kind of electrical vehicle. Yes. And that is also how water can go up into a tree, because you have the plus and the minus. The same discussion is going on now in our bloodstream, because our heart is constantly pumping the blood through the veins. But how is it possible without water into the body and the effects of water? And that is what he calls the easy zone. And that is really playing a major role. He did fantastic work on that. But we do see that water has so many more mysteries, and one of them is really the hydrogen, but also the connection to the oxygen. Everybody is playing now again, and that is a little bit what you come back then to the hard science. Some people say if we bring in more hydrogen, or if we bring in more oxygen, but then you work upon the molecular structure. What we see is that there is something else, that is the subtle energies. And water in itself has the intelligence to play with that. So it is much more important to understand, how do you get to that real mystery of water? Because water knows what to do.
Mm-hmm. Water knows what to do. It's so true. That's her intelligence. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the way that you guys have tapped into that intelligence with the analemma-wand specifically, because it's quickly become my favorite water alchemy tool for a lot of reasons. But I think the main reason is because, unlike a lot of other structured water devices that use electricity to create vibration and frequency and pattern the water in that way, you guys seem to have found a way over
15 years of research and a full year of maturing each and every, the water inside of each and every one matures for an entire year. And you mature it with the cycles and the patterns of nature herself, not with any electrical stimuli, from what I understand. So can you share a bit about the difference in between using electrical vibrational stimuli to pattern and program water versus what you guys do working with natural rhythms and cycles?
Yeah, it's a very important question because a lot of tools are now in the world, and many tools use or minerals or certain stones, and others use electricity or vortexes, and each one has an effect. So I'm not going to say that they don't have an effect. But what we have seen is water is extremely sensitive for the electromagnetic fields around us. That includes electricity. So if you put a pump, an electrical pump into water, then you can immediately measure the effect. So what we found is that water wants to play with Mother Nature and not with man-made tools. And yes, if you put a crystal into water, then it absorbs a part of that crystal into the water, and then you have only that specific frequency. What we wanted to create is Mother Nature in its full force. And it means the electrical fields in and around us. And to do that, you need a cycle of at least a full year. Now you have to find out, how do you create into the atomic structure such a system that water still knows what to do, that it can absorb it and hold it. Most tools, like a vortex, works, then you have a left or right turning vortex, but after a few minutes, the energy is gone, completely gone. And especially when you have created water with electromagnetic tools or devices, then a part of the information system is gone. So one of the things, and it was the good news, that we were familiar with data and with information systems. That was our background. And we wanted to know, how do you bring it in such a way that it can collect the outside data in its most optimal form? And then you should never manipulate it. So we found out how to do it step by step. And it was a lot of tests, well, a lot of money. And we had to go through many mysteries as well. And then we found out step by step that you can collect what we called model water that has all the abilities to absorb the information from outside. And that is what we put in our wand. And our wand exists out of a very specific crystal form that has the ability, that's quartz glass. It's man-made quartz glass. And quartz is the only product that really has the ability to copy a part of the information system that is inside to the outside world. So when you put this wand to a glass of water, and you stir it around, then the positive energy, what we call the coherent state, is brought to the chaotic state, and that becomes coherent as well. And that is how it works. But it takes a year. That is why you cannot compare our tool with any other tool, especially not when it is man-made. Mm-hmm. It's completely different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you've created something that has such a broad spectrum of vibrational influence, because it is Mother Nature herself, and because it is over the course of a year, whereas these other tools, they have a very narrow bandwidth of frequencies that the water is exposed to. And once water is inside of you, you want her to have the full palette of colors to paint with, depending on what your body needs. That's why, a lot of times when people say, oh, well, I just put the word love on my bottle of water and then that takes care of it. Or they say, well, I just play classical music to my water and then it has the same effect. And it's like, no, it doesn't at all have the same effect.
No, it has not the same effect. As a matter of fact, if you play, for instance, Bach into water, then you really see a response into water. But it is Bach. But maybe you don't need Bach, but you need the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
That's up to your physical and mental condition at that moment of time. Mm-hmm. Yes. So that is the whole difference. What we have seen, for instance, now some tests with people, and they use the wand and the water, and every time we get a new feedback because it depends from person to person. So if you play Bach and you give it to people that absolutely do not need Bach, then you limit down water.
Mm-hmm.
You limit down the information system.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense, yeah. Whereas what you're doing with the analemma-wand is giving her such a broad education that she's very mature. She can very maturely decide how to administer her healing.
And the wand itself decides what to do.
Mm.
Yes. So we bring back the real intelligence as far as we can. And we leave it up to water what to do into a body. And for instance, we do those tests not only in the laboratory, but we have tested now all over the world. And I give you the latest feedback. We have tested it, for instance, on polluted soil, really polluted. That was polluted for more than 14 years with all kinds of poisons that they use quite often in the agriculture.
40 or 14?
14. Yes. And then we have tested the DNA of all the microbiome into the soil. And what they found is that when you used the rainwater after treating it with a wand, and you let the water be there for 3 months, so you don't use the water for 3 months, but then still that energy is into the water, and then you use that rainwater and put it on the polluted soil, they found that the DNA was changing in a very positive way, much, much faster.
So it's increasing the diversity of the soil microbiome?
Absolutely. That is exactly what you say. Not only that, it's responsibility to the outside subtle energies from the sun and the moon, and it immediately starts to create life again.
Wow.
There is an intelligence in it.
So would one water wand be able to create coherence, that kind of coherence, in an entire tank of rainwater that you're using for agricultural
purposes? We have big wands as well.
Oh, you have big ones. Okay, that makes sense. And are those available for agriculturists? I'm making
Yeah. We do a lot of tests nowadays all over the world, and many of the tests are really amazing.
Amazing. That's really good to know. Oh, I would love for you to share about one particular test that you guys did that I heard you mention one time that just blows my mind when you guys were studying cucumbers. And you were saying that, well, I'll let you tell the story, but that you were able to restore both genders or both sexes into the cucumber plant. How did that work?
Well, a lot of people think that in the world of agriculture, especially when you work in the organic field, that everything is as Mother Nature wanted it to be. Well, was not the case at all with cucumbers. For many, many years all over the world, there were no male-female cucumbers anymore. Not even in the organic world. They created cucumbers with a chemical property. And after 4 years of testing with our water, we have now cucumbers, male and female.
That's amazing. So it was able to completely restore the genetics of the cucumbers. I feel like the implications of that are so profound. I mean, there's been so much harm done to the endocrine systems of humanity with our hormonal imbalances. I mean, not just humanity, but I mean, male frogs are turning into female frogs in the wild. We're seeing this in fish ecosystems. You know, human genders seem to be shifting quite a lot. And then certainly now that they've introduced gene therapy, it really makes me wonder if there's a way, there has to be a way to restore primal genetics to a species even after there's been hybridization. And I've not seen anything else that can do that except for this study that you guys have done. It's so hopeful.
I can't promise you that it works all the time, but in this case it worked.
Right. I mean, it's definitely conjecture to say that it would have any effect on those kinds of things, but I'm hopeful. Yeah. I'm hopeful. If anything could restore primal genetics, it would be water. I mean, nothing else would be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all absolutely fascinating, and I feel like I could talk to you about water for days and days and days on end. And I know that you guys, I mean, after 15 years of research in the laboratory, you probably have so many tests and so many studies and so many amazing things that you could share. I just have two final questions before we wrap up. One is with regards to the physical effects of the water. I've seen that, people get brainwave synchronization on EEGs. People can age backwards 1 to 12 years by drinking the water for only 3 months. What would you say are some of the most profound physiological and or psychological differences that people experience drinking analemma water?
It depends really from person to person, but there is one general thing that we are looking for now. We do a similar test now in India with the energy level of the people. That is called the ATP and the resistance against certain diseases. This water is no medicine. It is water as it should be. That is very important to understand. But what we do see is that if water is the communicator within all the cells of your body, and it responds suddenly much better to the subtle energies that you have to pick up on a daily basis with the sun and the moon and everything around us, also your emotions. And if that water has an ability to transport the information in the right way, then you really see what you just mentioned, that aging goes down. And that has been proved now. And we also have seen in the soil that the energy of the soil is coming back and the DNA is improving. And we are now testing it also on human beings. And we would be very surprised if we don't see a similar effect in humans, because we get so many positive feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I've definitely noticed a big difference since I've started drinking it, and I've tried every other water toy on the market. So I honestly didn't have huge expectations when I received this. I was like, cool, another water toy, great. I'm excited for this. I'm sure it's amazing. And I took a sip, and then I kind of started to walk away, and I literally did a double take. I had to turn back around. I wish I had it on film because I could feel it immediately. I could feel the difference. I could feel the textural quality. I could feel the energy in it. And then the longer that I've been drinking it, I've really noticed very subtle shifts. They're not massive transformations, but they're continuous, they're consistent, subtle shifts in my physiology and my psyche. And there's no way for me to isolate it and say, oh, it's just the analemma, but I have my suspicions for sure. So the final question I want to ask is, if humanity finally truly understood the great mystery of what is water, which I don't know if we could ever fully grasp that because she is the mystery of life itself, but what do you think would be possible on Earth if we finally started allying with water and we finally understood water wisdom on a grand scale?
If we really understand it on a grand scale, our whole education system will change. Because then we start to understand that communication with the outside world and ourselves is completely ignored. And if we start to do that, we are going to give much more respect to all the elements and to everything that lives. So we have to move. I think it's the only option we have. We have to move in that direction.
Absolutely. I love that education wouldn't just be an echo chamber of human ideas and human inventions and human discoveries, but we would finally humble ourselves and start to learn from the perfection and the intelligence all around us. And that's when we can truly evolve and move forward.
It should not be knowledge out of books. We should see it, feel it, and see the effects, and then it becomes a part of us. And I think that is a very important step forward. And I hope that we will make that step soon.
I hope so too. Well, thank you for all of the good work that you're doing towards that direction. I am so grateful for the whole analemma team and what you've created, and grateful to get to share a conversation with you today. I hope it's not the last one.
Isabel, it was more than a pleasure to speak with you, and you're welcome.
Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please comment below and let us know what you thought. And to get your hands on some of these remarkable analemma water wands, go to waterislife.shop and use the code water is life. Have a beautiful day, and as always, stay hydrated.